Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us in this edition of Dell Networking OpenManage Tech Talk. Today, we're going to talk about performance monitoring basics. This is going to be the first part of a multi-part series on performance monitoring. Hopefully, by the end of this session here, you'll have an understanding of the basic behavior and configuration for performance monitors. You'll know where to go to see performance data in the different portlets and dashboards. You're going to have some exposure to the SNMP interface monitor, which is the primary monitor for collecting data. You'll know the out-of-box enabled monitors, which are ICMP monitor, FTOS monitor, and there's a server monitor. You're going to know how to basically create a performance report. And then finally, hopefully we'll cover some best practices in terms of how to set up your monitors and what to look for. This session will be recorded and distributed, and if you do have questions along the way, please feel free to enter them into the chat window, and we'll get to those at the end. Okay, let's get started. So I guess the first question here is, or a couple of questions, is what is a monitor and why should you use monitors? Well, basically a monitor is a way that OpenManage can go and pull devices at specific intervals for specific data. Generally, monitors are SNMP-based monitors, and so we just basically query a set of SNMP attributes, one or more attributes. Monitor can also be a command line monitor, and in some cases you want to go on the command line and query for data and extract data that way. Generally, though, it's just going to be an SNMP type monitor. And so why should you use monitors? Well, generally in your network, you're not going to want to wait for customers to tell you where they have a problem or if they have a problem first. It would be nice if you knew in advance where problems were occurring or where they were going to occur before they even happen. And so what monitor data collection allows you to do is to see that data in summarized format. And for example, what we see here is on the performance assessment page, we see some select portlets that show a summary of data we're collecting. And so you can quickly see based on these that are showing here where our potential problems are. And you'll see, for example, in the middle here for memory utilization, we see a couple or three switches here that are having some pretty high memory utilization. Again, this indicates there's some potential problems with these devices. And at least you know you can go take some action. Same over here with CPU. Maybe you need to go and get a bigger box, or add more switches, or upgrade the CPU, whatever it is, so that users on this switch aren't calling you and complaining, and since you already know about the problem, you can take care of that before that happens. So that's the main thing, is to be proactive versus being reactive to your changing network conditions. And so a lot of the data we're going to see is also visually based here, and you'll see like this dashboard, but there's also a second part of this where you can link your monitors to your alarm framework and your automation framework, and that was covered in a prior tech talk on automation framework. But basically, these performance monitors will emit events of various kinds, and you can do the same sort of automation. For example, email somebody, email an administrator when they're seeing high memory or high ping response or CPU or whatever it is. You could email them, hey, this alarm has just been triggered. It'll be called a threshold or condition, which we'll see here in a minute. And they can take action on it that way, or you can automate your through the automation framework to take on some other action to be executed when these various events are triggered. Okay, so I'm just talking about places to see your data from a visual perspective. We do have this performance assessment page that we've talked about in other tech talks. There's also the performance tab here down below. If you go to the top end, there's also another collection of portlets that you can have been preceded for you to look at, and so you can look there as well. And then it's also worth noting that you can create your own pages, and you can actually remove portlets that you don't want to see. But if you go to add applications, there is a whole host of other portlets that are available for you to add to your pages if you're so interested. And not all of these are on all the pages we've seen. Some are, some aren't. And so you can see here there's a wide variety of things that you can add to a page. And again, all this data that we're looking at for each of these portlets comes from a specific monitor. And so One key thing to note here is whether you're looking at the assessment page or some other top-end page, all of this data must be collected through a performance monitor. And one common thing that happens is people will come to this page and they'll say, I have no data. How come I'm not getting any performance data? Well, there's two reasons why you might not see any data. Number one is you don't have the monitors enabled to collect this data, so you're not going to see anything. So depending on the attribute you're looking for example, ping, you would need the ICMP monitor on. Now that is one that's on by default, but other things such as interface bandwidth or interface errors, those are going to require another monitor, and typically that's the SNMP interface monitor. But those need to be turned on to start collecting data. So that's the first thing you should look at if you're not seeing any data here. The second thing is, I'll go back here to the performance assessment page. There is frequently some portlets here that are empty in my environment. These two right here don't have any data. Well, I'm in a lab environment, and it's very hard to throw enough traffic without some special tools to see, a packet loss of significant value or ingress or egress packet loss. And so mine just simply have no data. And so it's not going to show anything. Now you maybe see some here that have zeros on them. For example, down here, packet and out errors. Typically when it shows zeros, it may just be that this is such a small amount. It could be out to three decimal points or 4 decimal or further out, where it's just not showing them. That's generally the reason why you see them in some portlets, and then other ones are they're just flat out. There's no data on that, so it's not going to show anything. Okay. The other way to see performance data, so I mentioned performance assessment. We got the performance page with top end. We've got a default network dashboard that is going to show you by default some values within your network for various things. And this is generally the top problem type areas. And so this is a general layout, and you'll see there's various bits of data here that allows you to go and do a quick dashboard type valuation on your network. And so you'll see these thresholds here that are green, yellow, and red and yellow on this one here. These are basically thresholds that have been set on the monitor so that you can see graphically where your thresholds have been set. And so as you start to see a graph crawl into that area, you should start getting events if you've elected to set events on those particular areas. So it's kind of a visual indicator of when you're the thresholds that you've set or conditions. The other way is if you go into the resources manager, you can see performance data by device. And so I can select a device here, for example, right click it and just go to details. And that's going to bring up a portlet here that on the bottom here we have monitor status summary. It's just basically showing you what monitors are collecting data, and you have to see the different names here, temperature. You don't see the full name here. You can probably slide that over there and see the whole thing. What monitors are actually collecting data. That's useful to know if this device is in a monitor and which monitors. That's where you would look. And then more specifically, if you want to go to the performance tab, you're going to see some data on the currently collected metrics for that device. Okay, so that's another place to look. Speaking of the resources portlet here, we're going to be looking in just a minute at some monitors, but this network status column ties directly into the ICMP monitor that we seed by default. That automatically updates this field. So keep this in mind, this responding, not responding. There's occasionally you'll see indeterminate, and what that usually means is that your device, for some reason, is not in the monitor, the ICMP monitor. And so that's something to check as well. So let's go ahead and dive into where the monitors are, where all this data is generated for our portlets. Go to the Performance tab. And on the right here, we see Resource Monitors. I'm going to go ahead and expand this tab so we can get a little better view here. All right, so what I do want to mention here is I have a bunch of monitors enabled. There's only 3 that are enabled by default. First one is going to be an ICMP monitor, which we'll talk about here in a sec in more detail. The next one is going to be the FTOS monitors. On the next page here. These FTOS monitors are always enabled, but be aware that these have no target set in them. So despite the fact that they are on by default, they will not be pulling any targets unless you tell them to. And I'll show you again how to do that in a minute. So just just keep that in mind. And then the last one here is a server status monitor. This is a monitor that actually monitors the actual application server on OMNM itself. So you can see how much memory you have available and reserved on the server that's hosting OMNM itself, the application server. And so what you also notice here is we have a target count. And so that's also a column that is going to come into play here when we talk about best practices. But first of all, let's go into the ICMP monitor, just explore that a little bit. So there's a variety of ways to monitors that we can create. I'm going to just show you those briefly here. These will be covered in more advanced sessions, next sessions. I'm not going to go through any of these at all, but you see the list here of monitors, and we're going to actually add a few more here in the next release in 6.2 Service Pack 2. But you can create your own monitors, or you can copy existing monitors if you like the way that's working and you want to be more granular in your monitor targets. But let's look at the ICMP monitor just in a little bit of detail here. The main thing I want to point out on the ICMP monitor in monitor options is that there is a default group here for all Dell devices supporting ICMP. So if you discover the device and you were able to ping it, you will have an ICMP interface on that device. And in that case, it will automatically dynamically be added to this group, and it will automatically be pulled through ICMP. There are cases where you may do a discovery for devices that don't respond to ping. In those cases, they're not going to be in this monitor, and you probably see indeterminate or some other indicator that it's not getting ICMP data updated for the responding status. So keep that in mind. It's for the only things that have an ICMP interface and are pingable at discovery time. So that's the main thing on the ICMP monitor. There's a polling interval of 2 minutes. I'm going to discuss the rest of these attributes here on the SNMP interface monitor. It's a little more relevant, but the options are the same. So let's go to that. So the SNMP interface monitor is a monitor that's going to collect most of the data you're going to need for the portlets that we populate. So let's look at that one. So on the initial page, again, we have a polling interval that we can set. On the polling interval, we would recommend using the highest polling interval that you can get away with. If you don't need to know this data with a frequency, say, greater than every 15 minutes, then don't set it to 5 minutes, because you're just going to be going to the device 3 times more often than you really need to. And so this will impact the disk that you're working against and how much data it has to insert and pull back. And if you're talking about a lot of targets, then that could be a factor. We'll talk about that more in best practice. So in the first tab here, you have items in emit availability events. If you want to see traps on this when a threshold is exceeded, you want this checked. That also ties into retain availability data. You need to have this checked in order to use thresholds, because it's going to compare data and then decide when it needs to throw out a trap for you. So you need to check both of those. Retaining pool data is also optional. It just allows you to keep that data for other graphing purposes. And then this update network status is the one I did not point out on the ICMP monitor. This is the one, when checked, will automatically update that responding column and then resources, manage resources portlet. You don't want to have more than one monitor updating this, or you're going to get conflicting results, because one monitor may report status as working and the other may be down, and then you start getting into confused states. And so you should only have one doing it. It should be the ICMP monitor. If you don't want the ICMP monitor, then just uncheck it, but make sure only one other monitor is doing that update. Number of unreachable attempts before update. Well, this means that before it triggers an event to say it is off or not working or down for the device, or miss whatever event. In this case, it says I'm going to get one shot. If I get a polling result that meets that criteria, I'm just going to send an event. If you want it to be 3 or 4 or 5 attempts first before it sends an event, you can just change that number here. Okay, the next major item is monitor options. This is where you add your group. By default, the SNMP interface monitor will try to monitor all devices. And so when you turn this on, be aware, if you have 1,000 devices, all of a sudden you're going to start monitoring all interfaces on all devices. And again, this could impact your disk if your system's not set up for it. So that goes back to the sizing documentation that we have in the user guide. So you can add your own groups, more than one group if you want. You can do specific equipment. You can select those individually if you want to. You can add by static group. Just go down here, select the group option here, and there's a variety of groups here. Some are static, some are dynamic, and you can pick what you want there to add to this. Another thing to note is that on your groups that you choose, there's on the end here, there is a port filter, meaning you can decide which, since this is the SNMP interface monitor, you can filter on which port you want to monitor. And so you obviously don't want to monitor down ports because they're always going to be down. So we set this to have administrative status up, and we exclude fiber channel ports because those are reported a little bit differently. You can set that, change that, or update that however you see fit for your environment. There's also an interface level filter where you can set specific filter criteria. You can all go down to things as far as even if index, if you want to just, say monitor if index.1 across a bunch of devices, that's fine too. But there's a whole variety of parameters here that you can set here. For now, we just say anything that's interfaces up, we're going to monitor. So that's at the port level and the interface level. I'm going to restore that back to what it was. Down below here, what you see is the default attributes that get added for the SNMP interface monitor. And so there's about 20 attributes here. And so as you start monitoring more and more attributes, that also has an impact on your system. And you can see how easily, if you have 1,000 interfaces and you've got 20 attributes, you start to monitor. That's 20,000 attributes basically we're trying to get on every pole. And so you want to make sure that your disk is up to the effort. These can be added if you want to add OIDs when you start creating new monitors, and we'll cover that in future sessions, but you can add your own OID. Any SNMP OID that you can browse on the device, you can add and monitor it. And so you can create your own custom monitors. One example would be like an Oracle monitor. If you want to monitor an Oracle database with SNMP on, you could easily do that. It's just a matter of identifying the OIDs you want to collect data from and pull those into the monitor. Calculated metrics, sometimes you don't have all the raw data in the SNMP attributes, and you need to calculate them. What we'll do is we'll assign automatically a code to each attribute, and then you can go down and configure metrics and set your own calculations. You can simply add one and you want to name it, and then you can set units and then set the formula. And so just as an example here, you'll see the formulas here. For example, bandwidth received is a percentage unit, and it's basically value D, which is if in octets times 8,000 divided by K times L, and K times L over here on the second page, which is if speed and uptime. And so that's how it comes to this value of bandwidth received. And now we have an attribute that we can also report on. So it's pretty nice little feature there. Okay, thresholds is another key area where you want to be able to set thresholds so that as certain things exceed certain parameters, you can emit an event. And so we're going to just take a quick look at one here. For example, on this one, we're doing bandwidth received. We want to do a calculation of average, so average bandwidth received. We set some thresholds here for boundaries, and so let's look at the one that says high here. So for the high one, we're saying the low boundary is 90, and if it exceeds that, we're going to emit. It's going to be, we're calling it the high. We're going to emit a critical event. This means that we're going to get an alarm in the alarm manager that's going to be a critical event. And so then what you see here is there's ones for low and one for medium. So you can trigger different events as things start to change. And it gives you pretty good control over what events you want to see or be notified on. So there's a variety here. I'm not going to go through them all. And so let's just move on to, I guess, conditions. We'll talk about inventory mappings in a future session. Conditions are similar to thresholds in that you have a little more flexibility to add specific conditions here. Let me just show you an example here. In this case, I want to alert and say on it and make it a major, and I want to do it only on one try. But let's say my conditions now can be things like, if my interface, well, it's not a good one. Let's try if my packet in is equal to some number, then I can add some other condition. My packet errors equals 100, and so you can go ahead and build up your filter so that once this condition is met, you will also emit an event and in this case it will be a major event, and you see here alerts checked. So that gives you some more granularity over when you might want to be notified for that monitor. Okay, so that's a quick run through on the basics of the monitor setup. Let's just go look at alarms real quick, and I'll show you, see if I have an example here of some monitors. So here's an example of a monitor, and I see it's telling me that my condition was met here. ICMP monitor, it timed out after waiting. Okay, so this is actually a timeout. See if I have another one here that's more, it couldn't get to the box on that one. Okay, so here's one here, a major. The demo, this is a demo monitor, this is the name of the monitor, demo threshold and conditions. My CPU utilization, idle range, the CPU major, it was greater than 45. So I set a condition basically saying that if it's greater than 45, we want to admit a major event. So this is an example of what you will see in terms of events that you can be notified on or use for your automation framework. Okay, let's look at the dashboards. So the other way that data can be displayed is via dashboard. And so on the lower board here, there's one called dashboard views, and you can right click and select new. You can create a simple or custom dashboard. And so a simple dashboard, if you're to create one, allows you to basically add an entity, some equipment. You would select some equipment. And then you have all of the available attributes that you can pull into this dashboard. And so you simply just select it and then save it, and then you've got a new simple dashboard view. I'll show you one I have here created. Let's just go a quick edit screen here. So I'm monitoring this device for these attributes. That's probably too many, so let's just take some off here. I think I was playing with this earlier, and it's in Max or something like that. And again, at the top here, you can set the time frame if you want. Save that. And if I'm monitoring these, I should be able to get some data. And so this is basically saying I've got 100% availability. And anyway, that's one example there. And there's some options here for editing it if you want to edit it again. I think because I have that on percent there. Okay, so it's not monitoring those other two attributes is why I'm not getting any data. So let's just go back and let's just go back with availability. Availability, save, and there's our data. So you can also export to CSV if you like, and you can set up here at the top upper left if you want to see a real-time view. You can change this to last 30 minutes and then click the checkbox and it should show you the last 30 minutes. So you have that flexibility to change that up here if you want to see more granular data or longer duration. So that's a simple dashboard. The custom dashboard is laid out to basically you can create little sub dashboards within here, so you can have a multiple on a screen. And so it's the same idea where you add the target and then you add the attributes. And so depending on your targets, you add a target here. Your target might be an interface or it might be a top-level device, depending on what you're monitoring. And so the options will change here. I could add something like CPU utilization over here, and then I could do that for all of these, and then my dashboard would show, basically this table here, 3x4, 12 different screens here in a dashboard type format. And so you can set your columns here if you want to. If you only want two or one big one, it's up to you. I'll show you an example here, one that I had. We'll launch this one. So here's one with just 3 on it. And so I have one that's just doing ICMP against these 2 devices, and you can see that being graphed here. On this particular one, I'm doing packet errors on the lab distribution switch that I have, and it's just monitoring these 2 interfaces. And so there's not much going on. You can see at the bottom here, it's all zeros. Again, it's a lab. And then the last one here is, again, the lab distribution switch. I'm 30.1. All I'm doing is availability and bandwidth received. And so you see availability is really low here, and the bandwidth received is at the top here. So you can create these, customize these however you like. Same options up here for the duration. There's one seated by the system, the interface talkers. And this one here is going to show us a variety of basically the top talking devices for some predefined transmit percent. You can read these across the top here: bandwidth utilization percent, bandwidth received percent. Anyway, some predefined dashboard type items that will give you an idea of possibly what issues might be going on in your network. Okay, so that's an overview of how to see the data through the dashboards and portlets. I'm going to go over to reports here. And we're going to show how maybe we can have reports that also show our performance data. Reports are going to be covered in another more detail in another tech talk. Generally, you create a template first and then create a report based on the template. The goal here is to show you that you can create any one of these template types, but I'm going to use table as an example here. And so if I wanted some sort of performance report, I could basically just put a title in here, and then the key point here is that in the source categories where you select your monitoring attributes, these are going to be called active monitoring, not performance monitoring. At one point, it was called active monitoring, and that's where the attributes stayed. And so there's a variety of attributes here. In the A's, we see by monitor. You can actually report by specific monitor targets if you want. Some other attributes are listed here in the def through P. Again, by monitor targets, FTOS, different monitor types, and then over in the R through S, you have some retention policy, SLA. And so there's a variety of things here. Once you select a particular category and say, let's just say it's the interface monitor, since that's kind of what we were talking about. Let's just pick this one, for example. It's going to populate with different categories, select the type, and so you're going to have different attributes available for that particular monitor. And so you just drag those into your report, just like a normal report, and then those will become reportable. So you probably will have to hunt around a little bit just to see where the attributes are you want to report on, and then you can pull those into the report for the who do create the report versus the template. Anyway, let me show you one that has already been created, a report that I generated earlier today. Just see if we can look at that just as an example of what you might see. So for example, this one is just showing the target of the monitor, showing an attribute called bandwidth transmit, BPS, bandwidth utilization percent, bandwidth received, BPS. And so it's just going to report everything in inventory, unless you filter it in the report, not the template, in the report, to just select specific devices. This is going to show everything in inventory from lowest to highest. That's the way the sort order is currently. You can change that. You see down at the bottom, you see our highest values, the way it's sorted. There's also options in reporting to summarize this data into chunks if you need to, and again, that'll be covered on a future report tech talk. Okay, finally, the last thing we should probably talk about is best practices. Go back to my performance tab. You can click on any of these help icons here. That will take you to context-sensitive help. What I'm going to show you here is we have a whole section on best practices for monitors. And the key thing I want to point out here is I talked a little bit about polling intervals and a little bit about targets and attributes. Generally, you want to keep your targets less than 10,000 per monitor. And so that goes back to this Manage Resource tab. I'm sorry, the Performance Monitoring tab. I'll enlarge that again. And you'll see your target count over here. Once this target starts getting around 10,000, then the table structure, the underlying table structure, becomes a little bit more inefficient in terms of persisting data. There's a lot of data that's getting persisted and so to maximize that, what you want to do is keep it down under 10,000. The other best practice, as I mentioned, was the polling interval. Don't exceed the polling interval that you any smaller than what you need. So don't go down to a second because it's great. I want to see everything in a second, because you're going to tax your system to a point probably where it's not going to function very well. And what you're first going to see in that case is you'll either see in the alarm window or down here in this monitor status summary, you'll start getting these indicators. It'll say polling interval skipped. And what that means is that the last cycle was not able to finish pulling all the targets before the next one started. So it's going to have to start skipping. So you're basically, your cycle's too fast for your system. And so that's a keen thing to keep in mind, that these polling intervals skipped is a direct indicator that your system is not able to poll fast enough. And so look at your targets. You want to divide. You can, if you have a target, a particular monitor you like, and it's got 10,000 targets, what you want to do is copy that monitor into another monitor. When you copy it, again, it's just as simple as doing a right click and copy. And then you want to set your targets to have maybe half the amount of targets as it previously had. And so you could divide up and just use a dynamic group or a static group, but set them differently so that they're each monitoring a different set of targets. And that's going to hopefully restore any issues with having too many targets. Anyway, on this best practices, there is a bunch of examples on how your attributes, and you'll see here there's attribute counts here, number of targets, and how that may impact your disk. And there's specific things around 1500 RPM disk, which are typically like iSCSI disks or in the SSD range, or your standard 7200 RPM disk. They have different capabilities to insert data. And if you don't want to exceed those capabilities, you should read this section to understand your monitoring parameters and make sure they're within the scope, or that you go out and buy a better disk or a better disk array, or set your intervals lower, or split up your monitors, as I already mentioned. Okay, that pretty much wraps up this basic introduction to performance monitors, and I hope that covered all the topics, at least for the initial pass, and hopefully set us up for the next few sessions. All right, thanks everyone for joining us, and we will talk later.